Verse 41, 4 tables were on this side and 4 tables on that side. By the side of the gateway, 8 tables on which they slaughtered the sacrifices. I'm just picturing what I did this morning. One of my points was, if we know that these things are going to be implemented again, should we know about them now? Right? And I went to the farthest part of the stage and I went, no, we're the church. What's going on over there? Like we have no idea what's going on, and that's like, we're not okay with that. Versus we know that these things are going to be implemented again, so we should be looking into it.
I think that's a very important issue, because this is post-rapture, post-tribulation, post-revelation. We're into the millennial kingdom, and we're back to animal sacrifices. Not in anticipation, but in commemoration of what Jesus has done. So as we have the breaking of bread today, the world of the millennial kingdom, will have animal sacrifices once again, commemorating what Jesus has accomplished.
I was just going to ask why they did that, and you answered my question, so thank you.
Had a conversation with a fellow. It's really neat to watch him, the fellow carpenter tradesman, and you just really see him wanting to understand more, and he was explaining how, and he just meant the commemoration of the sacrifice that Christ made, but he was trying to picture raising a lamb, him and his family. And then all of a sudden whether it's sin or it's time to make that offering, but the idea of coming with his son and daughter and his wife, and coming to the temple and watching as they lay a hand on the head of that lamb and slit its throat, let it bleed out, and then watch it prepared and then placed on the altar and burnt. And the young dad was like, I don't think you have to really teach on sin and how God sees sin when everyone's doing that, right? Like little Johnny, why are we doing this, Dad? Because this is how God sees sin. The wages of sin is what?
Death.
It's death, right? Like this God's given us this picture, and he's like, in a non-weird way, I wish it was almost back. Right, because now you're trying to convince the child, like God hates sin, and something has to die, and there has to be blood spilled, right? I know there was blood spilled, but trying to convince a child, well, you sin, like you are a sinner, versus, this is how God sees it, like the feast the same way, right? How do we make sure that money doesn't control our lives? You take your first fruits before God every time. Right, that's the first response. You do it as a family. You do it with your kids, right? So the pictures all point towards Christ, but they point towards how we're to function, as God's people. There's an imagery there that's really, really, I'm going to say, crucial to understand.
One of the men asked the question in the adult Sunday school class this morning, and asked, did Adam and Eve watch while God killed some animals to provide skins, clothing for them?
Yeah.
Did they watch? Well, there's nothing in the scriptures that says, yes, they were there watching. But it's very likely that they were, for a few reasons. First of all, when the sacrifice, capital S, Mary and a whole lot of others were there to watch the nails, the thorns, the spear. They watched. And Adam and Eve would have seen death for the first time. They would have also seen substitution. And I think for them not to have seen that would be very unusual.
Almost counterproductive too. You did this, so I have to do this, but I'm just thinking how, really in many ways it's just North American culture that tries to keep the idea of blood, or keep the idea of death away from society, right? That's why my parents won't take kids to funerals anymore. Oh, we don't want to harm or probably reverse their vibe or whatever. They're like, we don't want to bring this negative to their lives versus that has to be an element of their lives, right? Eternity, you know, the brevity of life.
Oklahoma's different.
Yeah.
They're like, you're in kindergarten, they're like, they have open casket funerals, and they're like, here, there's the person. You're like, ah.
Is it still like that though?
I don't
'Cause a
know,
lot
but it
of-
definitely
Not calling
was
you old, but
when
a lot
I
has
was,
changed since you were in Oklahoma.
when I was growing up, and still, I mean, it's weird too, this society, but like, we have pictures of our relatives in the casket. Like, they take pictures and they keep them. And, like, I remember going to funerals since I was, of course, my mom was probably playing the piano or something, but children at funerals is very normal
Mhm.
down there.
Mhm.
I think it pretty much still is,
Mhm.
at least in.
Well, I know our Mennonite community, I mean, they, all the funerals are held in the home, right? And I've been to numerous ones where you go in and, you know, give your condolences to the family and
I was never creeped
kitchen
out by it.
tables there.
Well, you get the push of modern whatever, that you don't want to have any kind of, a child seeing any kind of animal being hurt or killed or anything like that. And I'm thinking, you know, it's just another evidence of
Or forcing them to go to church.
Satan doing everything he can to remove this
Mhm.
agony of sin and what it really
Yeah.
does.
I can remember going to a couple houses when there was somebody that died and visitation was at the house.
Mhm.
It used to be a big thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we're back, and I mean, I think that would be a good, like if we were to have some of those dialogues and discussions, like why implement the sacrificial system again? Right, it's the visual, I mean, ultimately you've got Christ, King Jesus on the throne, you can, still with the nail scars in his hands, right, we know that from John 20. And yet here we have this teaching tool, and that may be going a little light for humanity for that 1,000 years, right? Observing it this way because it is a visual picture that they participate in as to what God sees sin as, right? How to keep your heart from being captured by money. At the same time, you know, a lot of it's symbolic of the future hope, but they're living in the future hope. Oh yeah, this is us now. What was it like for them when they looked forward to it? Yeah, a lot of things to consider.
I think that's the first time I've had somebody actually explain that this is, because I've always wondered, why are they doing sacrifices in the millennium? But that fact that it's commemorative as opposed to the actual propitiation or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like Hebrews says, he made that sacrifice and entered the most holy of holies once for all.
Right.
So I mean, it's sin's still paid for, right? So how else would we explain the sacrificial system? Right, commemorating.
Right.
I wish there was a smaller word to get my tongue around that. but you know, like, or
Well, it's like this, the Lord's Supper is done it's in remembrance.
yeah. It,
But that's a sobering thing, because, you know, a lot of people are like, whoa, no, I can't kill an animal. And to realize that your favorite pet or whatever has to be sacrificed because of your sin.
so then we start with the dialogue, where will we be as born again believers, as part of the church? Where will we be as this is unfolding? I mean, we've been raptured, glorified bodies, no more sin nature, judgment seat of Christ, ruling and reigning with Christ. For some, you know, like however that works, inheritance. I've said it before, I kind of hope I'm not gonna have to sacrifice an animal. You know, like again, I don't mind killing animals and hunting and all that stuff. Like I actually got this strange enjoyment out of butchering things, but the idea of participating in that, I'd be like, I really hope I don't have to, but will we see it? Will we be there? Will we be helping the Jews? And I don't think I've arranged at a conclusion. I know the nations come up for the feasts, right? And if they're coming up to Jerusalem, I'm sure they're participating somehow in the sacrificial system, but we know the sacrificial Torah first is for the Jew. I haven't arrived to a conclusion there, and probably never will with what we have. But we'll be there. We'll be watching. Right? We'll be coming up, like we'll be out in the nations and coming up and worshiping the King as the sacrificial system is going on in the temple. I mean, you're going to be around it. Should we know a little bit about it before we get there?
We do know the nations will be required annually to go to Jerusalem. I've wondered, what will be the mode of transportation? And
Yeah.
are we going to fly? Further, I've wondered, will it be by representation, or will it be done in some electronic form? Because to put the world's population in Jerusalem, there wouldn't be standing room. So I'm not sure how that'll work. Will it be
I mean, we're gonna be
staggered?
reduced to like 3 billion people instead of 6 billion, but yeah, that's
It's
a,
an
yeah.
awful lot of people in a
Yeah.
small area.
Yeah.
And will it be by representation or in sequence, like so many today and so many tomorrow? And if so, and if we go by plane, there's be an awful lot of planes.
Yeah.
Make a bigger airport in Tel Aviv.
And I mean, this is where those conversations, like once we get, let's say, the proper truths in place, and I mean, we can be creative in a sanctified form, but you think a large majority will want to go up and worship the King. It's going to be a completely different society, a complete, like you'll be arranging your whole year for nothing else there, that Feast of Tabernacles, right? Because you want to go up and see King Jesus. You want to go up. Now that's for humanity. I mean, again, ruling and reigning with Christ, you know, what our role is. I'm going to want to go up as much as I can. You know, I'm going to want access to that temple as much as I can. Again, maybe not to kill lambs, but to have those conversations and go up and worship.
I feel like I remember reading, and I can't remember where, just different things where at times they were supposed to do stuff by tribe. So
Yeah.
that sounds like a more logical.
On Zachariah 14, we were there this morning, they come up to the feasts, and if they don't, right, Christ, God's King there, withholds the rain, right, there's famine, and he deals with Egypt. So I think we got to this place. Ezekiel, like 50 years before, was given a vision with specific temple dimensions. If we were to, 41 dimensions of the sanctuary of this new temple. I mean, Zerubbabel's temple, isn't it? So we know it's one that's coming. Maybe now would be a good time to mention too, that in the tribulation, do you remember learning about how the Antichrist makes those blasphemous sacrifices in the temple? I think it's Daniel that talks about that, right? The Antichrist, he sets up. That tells us that there's a third temple during the tribulation, okay, during that time of peace and the promise of the treaty there before it's destroyed. And then we see the temple destroyed in Zechariah 14. So whenever we're talking about the Messianic temple, where priest and king are sitting on it, and King Jesus takes it, it's the fourth temple. And it's interesting enough too, when you, I could send a link, like the Jews today have a whole, actually it's on a museum now, they've come public with it. They have all the elements of the temple and a lot of the different
Basins and stuff.
items and everything there that there be there. They have it all ready for this third temple when it starts, which is pretty cool, until you realize it's going to be destroyed again.
Yeah,
And then you have to
for
form.
the Antichrist. Yeah.
Yeah. So even as Zachariah is getting this vision, and Joshua, and they're building this fourth temple, we have Ezekiel. I mean, you keep working through it. It has specific details. I'm thinking of ESV when Leona was reading. Ezekiel chapter 44 It's all about the priests, the Levites serving in here, so that makes sense that you'd have the king and the Levite priests. So I would probably agree with the ESV just on the spot here, but then at the same time, you have prophet, priest, and king all in one, with King Jesus sitting on the throne, right, ruling from Jerusalem. Why don't we take a couple minutes in chapter 43? We'll just read the first 12 verses because it talks about the glory. So again, when Joshua is told to build the temple and the glory will appear, or the glory will be over it, these aren't new terms for them, because 50 years before we've got God sending the message to Ezekiel. So Ezekiel 43, I think this is pretty cool. I have no idea where we left off.
I don't know either.
Okay, I will start. Afterward, he brought me to the gate that faces towards the east. So this is the temple gate, one of the temple gates.
And behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east, and his voice was like a noise of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory.
Just pause for a second. Do you remember me a while back explaining that in Ezekiel 10, we see the glory of the Lord departing, crossing the threshold, right, and departing? And we don't see that glory of the Lord returning until we see Jesus enter the temple. I think it's John 10, right, the God's glory in the flesh. But here we're looking, ahead to the Messianic way, the glory returning. Okay?
It was like the appearance of the vision which I saw, like the vision which I saw when I came to destroy the city. The visions were like the vision which I saw by the river Shabar, and I fell on my face.
The glory of the Lord came into the temple by way of the gate which faces toward the east.
The Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple.
What temple, Sarah?
Fourth, is it?
You got it. You're a perfect student. Okay, I'm looking ahead to the Messianic temple.
Where are we?
Verse six.
Verse 6.
Verse 6. Then I heard him speaking to me from the temple, while a man stood beside me.
And he said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever.
How long's forever?
Forever.
Right.
No more shall the house of Israel defile my holy name, they nor their kings, by their harlotry or with the carcasses of their kings on their high places.
They put their idol altars right next to mine, with only a wall between them and me. They defiled my holy name by such wickedness, so I consumed them in my anger.
Now let them put their harlotry and their carcasses of their kings far away from me, and I will dwell in their midst forever.
How long's forever? Forever. Son of man, describe the temple, the house, all right, to the house of Israel, okay, the one that's coming, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and let them measure the pattern.
And if they be ashamed of all that they have done, show them the form of the house, and the goings out thereof, and the comings in thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the laws thereof, and write it in their sight, that they may keep the whole form thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and do them.
This is the law of the temple. The whole area surrounding the mountaintop is most holy. Behold, this is the law of the temple.
Okay, so then, we'll just stop there. So then 50 years later, right, Zachariah is getting this message, right, about Joshua, who's a high priest, right, looking after spiritual things. He's going to make a crown and put the crown on the priest. Both offices are going to become one, right, or side by side, okay? And then there is going to be a future temple built. He is going to rule from that future temple. They have this passage, right? They know the dimensions, they know about the future. God himself is going to dwell, soles of his feet, okay? So they've got that picture already. Does that make sense?
Is that according to the order of Melchizedek?
Yeah, Melchizedek, the name, yeah, we could get into that.
One of the cross
Okay.
references here is Psalm 110, which references Melchizedek.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's, again, everything grows out of the Old Testament. I think that the big thing is we have that picture of prophet, priest, king. I mean, nobody should be really like, oh, I have no idea what this means. Right? I mean, it's been prophesied about, Psalm 110, like you said, Ezekiel. So let's just maybe go back to Zachariah and
So Melchizedek was a king and a priest too.
correct, yeah.
So when did that stop?
When did what stop?
Where you no longer had a priest that was also a king? Or was it just
That was
exclusive?
before the law, that was before, I mean, that's Abraham
Yeah.
prior to the nation even, I mean, Abraham had his call by that point.
But there was no like formal structure to a nation at the time.
I was trying to think there even,
So I think most of the time, king and priest is supposed to be separate, like typically.
yeah, like the role, the model we have coming out of,
Abraham, yeah, because the tribe of Levi was supposed to be the priests, and the tribe of Judah were the kings.
Mhm.
I
Interesting.
was gonna say, the covenant hasn't even been made yet with Abraham. So I mean, using Melchizedek as an example in the New Testament of a priest outside of the Aaronic Levitic line, right, and he was a king. So that would be where some of that teaching came from.
Interesting, just stuff I've never considered before.
Yeah, that's good, there's gonna be lots to come. Okay, so I'm just gonna read 12 to 13 again. It's a memorial, we know it's future. Behold, the man whose name is the branch, from his place he shall branch out, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. Yes, he shall build the temple of the Lord. He shall bear the glory. Okay, and we read glory, glory coming back across the threshold in Ezekiel. He shall bear the glory, and shall sit and rule on his throne. So he shall be a priest on his throne, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both offices.
I've said this before, I'm sure we all know it. But this statement, behold the man, whose name is the branch, that's a direct messianic passage. The Hebrew term for branch is netzer, and that's where Nazareth comes from. In Matthew 2:23, Jesus is referred to as the Nazarene, the branch. So in Zachariah 6:12 is a direct messianic statement.
I think the last thing that I'm going to say, and I think it's important, if you come down to the last part of verse 15, we'll just read all of 15. It says, even those from afar shall come and build the temple of the Lord. It's going to be a group effort. Okay, cool. Then you shall know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you, and this shall come to pass if, okay, Neil's giving me the nod, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God. So what does Israel have to do?
They have to obey.
That we have to, we're seeing these terms and conditions. There has to be a generation that has to come to terms, I'm going to say with who Christ is. It has to come back in repentance, and then these things will take place. So what is the purpose the first priority purpose of the tribulation? Right, when we see the 7 years, what is it? It's the purging and purifying of Israel, okay? So that they're getting a chance to come back to obedience and recognize Christ. Then these things can come into play. So my last, just turn to chapter 12 of Zachariah, chapter 12, verse 10. And we would say that this is taking place at the end of the tribulation. Verse 10, Zechariah 12, verse 10, after a lot of in that day, telling us its future, a lot of purging, a lot of purifying, a lot of burning, destroying. It says, and I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication, that they will look on me whom they pierced. Who did they pierce?
Jesus.
King Jesus, that's right. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. So there's going to be an acknowledgement of what Israel did in the past. And I'm going to say there'll be a turning. Okay? Not much more could be said about Matthew 24 and 25. But there will be a time when they recognize who he is, who they pierced, recognize who he is, and there will be a turning. And then, second coming, right, then we have this messianic kingdom, messianic temple set up. And that is, a large part of our hope today, that King Jesus is coming back and he's going to make things right.
Verse 10 says, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced. If we trace that me back, it goes back to verse 1 of this chapter. And the me is Jehovah, God himself. And between Zechariah chapter 12 and verse 1 and 10, we have a very strong, clear statement for the deity of Christ. I've used that many, many times in talking with followers of the Kingdom Hall. And the most intelligent thing they've said in response is, I never saw that before.
Yeah, and Jesus' parables about the vine dressers and what they do to the king's son and master's son, the more we interact with these texts, the more the New Testament's like, oh, that's what they're talking about. This makes sense. They weren't just creating a new adventure here. The roots of it all come out of these messianic texts. So I love Zechariah. Okay, we're over time.
I broke that by accident.
I think my application for tonight would just rest in the idea of understanding my hope better. Right? Creation groans for it. That verse from Romans 8, where creation waits for the revealing of the sons of God. Maybe it's not as many people as we think. When we're thinking about some of the dynamics. But being heirs, when it talks about heirs to position, heirs to the inheritance that's coming, that we're in many ways earning right now. Even the idea of even those coming from afar shall come and build the temple of the Lord. I want to build it. I want to help, right? There's a lot of, there's physical, tangible things. So I need to understand more about my future hope in Christ. Fair enough?